Texas Governor Greg Abbott now says 135 people have died from this month's devastating flooding. Those conditions and flooding in other states are raising questions about the nation's flood maps and their ability to ensure communities can prepare for rising risks. Joining us now is Jeremy Porter, who is a climate risk researcher for the organization First Street. He also teaches flood risk mapping on the university level, so it sounds like you are the perfect person to answer all these questions. Appreciate you joining us today. So, I mean, look, let's start here. What did the FEMA flood maps show us in the Texas Hill Country versus what actually transpired there earlier this month? I mean, I think the big question is, were they accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a big question about FEMA maps in general. I think what we know is that FEMA maps usually do a pretty good job of mapping coastal storm surge. They do a pretty good job of mapping major river channels, but there's a lot of flooding across the country that they end up missing. And when you go back and look at Kerr County, Texas, for instance, where we saw this last flood, about half the properties that have major flood risk aren't captured by the FEMA zones. So there are some methodological and fundamental differences in the way in which we, for instance, create our flood risk maps and the ways in which FEMA creates their flood risk maps.
So I want to follow up on that because it does sound like there's sort of a lot there. How are the maps made, and how then do they get updated as things change?
Yeah, so the FEMA maps in particular are mandated by Congress. There's a flood program that was created by the federal government to map risk and really to drive the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. And so those maps are really good in major river channels. They're really good in coastal storm surge areas. They don't take heavy precipitation into account. And when you think about the types of events that we've been seeing recently, we're seeing heavy precipitation in New York City, heavy precipitation that's driving flash flooding in Texas, heavy precipitation in Chicago. The types of flooding that we're seeing today are really driven by that type of flood source, and FEMA zones just aren't taking that into account.
Why?
It's a mandate from Congress in terms of the way in which they build it. FEMA knows the issue. FEMA wants to correct the issue. FEMA can't do it as engineers on the ground.
So, I mean, look, if my home isn't on a FEMA flood map, how do I even know that there's a risk? And I mean, what are some tangible tips of how I can avoid a disaster like that?
The easiest way is to find data, find an organization or a site that actually tracks this type of risk. At First Street, we've partnered with Zillow, with Realtor, with Redfin. Our climate data is now on every property across the U.S., but you can also go to firststreet.org. Just type in your address, type in your zip code, understand your community risk. Really, there's a lot more places to find this data today than what we've had in the past, but most people aren't aware that it exists.
Okay, well, it sounds like just be cognizant, do your research, and pray. Yep. All right, Jeremy Porter, appreciate it.
Thank you.